and welcome to the Rally Point with Dominic Fielder, the author of the King's German series, and myself, Rob McLaren, the author of the Jobert series. Hello, Dominic Fielder.
Hello, Rob. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. Very well, thank you. Each month at the Rally Point, we catch up with friends who enjoy the Napoleonic period. We record the first 30 minutes of the gathering, but once the recording is over, we remain online and the conversation continues. And this month, we would like to welcome a panel of line infantry experts to the Rally Point. Jim Cormier from the United States, with Mark Middleton from Colmar in France, Hans Karl Weiss from Bamberg in Germany.
This is something I've shamelessly swiped from the Perry's website, and it was on there about a month ago. And it is Peter Cushing, the Peter Cushing, asking questions about Austrian cavalry regiments. And it made me think about where we are as a group and the very, very fortunate times in which we live. And here's somebody like Peter Cushing writing this in sort of, I think, sort of late 70s, early 80s, asking for some information. With all the context that he has, he's asking for information which we would now take as something that we'd all be able to share. Or you'd go to somebody like Stephen for the absolute word on something, and just how much he would have enjoyed what we have now as a group in Rally Point. So a man with all that with all that, I would say, sort of money and knowledge and connections that he had, asking for something about questions about the Napoleonic era. And yet what Rob and I listen to every time we have one of these meetings, the detail that we have is now so absorbing and so technically interesting, where you've got people bringing sort of memoirs to life. I think of, his name escapes me. Who's the chap, Rob?
Jonas Deneath.
Jonas, bringing things to life. Every time I listen to Hans Karl, and Mark, it's like new pearls of wisdom drop, and I think this letter shows just how fortunate we are in this age. We can experience and have a really good idea about the Napoleonic battlefield in a very safe way. None of us are going to die of cholera or wounds inflicted from the battlefield. But if you want to get out there and be a sort of living historian, reenactor, there's now you can experience that Napoleonic world and immerse yourself as much as you can in a way that I think people living sort of 50 years ago wouldn't have had an idea of. All that information was around, but it just wasn't as accessible. And that's really what I wanted to. That's what this letter brought home to me, is how lucky we are as a group. But as writers, Rob and I will tell you that one of the key things is to be able to get the feel of something so that it makes sense to the reader. Where can we turn for this other than, obviously, the wealth of information that's out there? It's people who are the living historians. And for once, it's my absolute pleasure just to get out of the way and let you do the heavy lifting and talk through the questions that you've got. And I know there's an absolute goldmine of information. I should be making notes shamelessly and stealing the ideas. I just want you to know that in advance.
So the purpose of today's meeting is we're going to discuss various aspects in fine detail of the French line infantryman's uniform. And the purpose of doing that is to enable the reenactor to more accurately present that type of view or portrayal. What I've done is I've asked many of my reenactor friends to ask some questions that they would like answered about this subject. And that was many, many weeks ago. I subsequently sent that list of questions to the usual suspects who are in attendance now, so they'd had a chance to look at those questions, perhaps come up with answers. And they've done so. So without any further ado, I would just like to start asking questions. I'll go one by one and ask the panel to respond accordingly. The first question is, was the outward surface of the shoulder belt leather, was it rough or smooth?
So this one I had to actually deep dive a little bit more than what I wanted to. And in the end, because I didn't actually find anything in Napoleonic regulations that specifically talked about this issue. So I kept going backwards and backwards, and in the end, I fell upon the regulation of the king dated 17th of August, 1755, which indicates that the Giberne cover, so the Giberne is the cartridge box, that's got côté chair on the outside. And later on in the text, it says the banderole, so that's the leather belt that holds the Giberne, is to be worn with the côté fleur on the outside. So I dug a little bit deeper to find out exactly what does this mean. So côté chair, literally translated, means the fleshy side. Côté fleur, literally the flower side. So the flower side is the side of the leather where the hairs of the cows were, and that produces a rather smooth surface, if not, it's an imperfect smooth surface. And the côté chair, the fleshy side, that produces the opposite. It's the inside of the cow. It's the actual inside of the beast, and that produces a rougher surface. From there, I went forwards afterwards and found Bardin's dictionary in the 1820s, 1830s. And whilst he doesn't explicitly talk about this, he does say that same thing, côté fleur was for the outside and côté chair was for the inside. So for me, it's the cartridge box cover is rough, and the belt that holds it, the outside share part, is the smooth side.
I absolutely agree with Mark on the description. We have to know what buffalo is. Buffalo is special treated leather. It's usually white. And it's not like a normal leather when we see a normal leather of a shoe leather, because the outside, there's a outside skin. It's a very thin and smooth skin, and this is taken away. And also the inside, the share side, this is also smoothened out. So this is a split leather, and this is a leather which is specially treated. And I was lucky enough to see several original items, and they are smooth on the outside and on the inside. But not like when you put up like a modern shoe leather where you have this very, very thin outside skin, which is very smooth. And then when you look in the Manuel de Infanterie, you see the recipes, how they blackened or how they whitened things. And you can only, if you use the recipes, you can use the only on the smooth skin to whiten the buffle.
Started leading into the second question, and that is, was the outward surface of the cartridge box leather, was that rough or smooth? Hans Karl, go ahead, if you will.
Yeah, I remember well when I reproduced my first cartridge box, and I was quite proud. And then I arrived, and then some knowledgeable person told me, "Oh yes, it's nice, but the rough leather side is at the outside." And I said, "But when I look at your cartridge box, it's like mirror, like polished." But then I found out in the Manuel de Infanterie that the wax which is produced for polishing the cartridge pouch was heated, and then it was applied, and it was polished with a heated spoon. So you will create a mirror-like effect, and this only holds when you have the rough leather side outside. If you have the smooth leather side outside, it will peel off and flake off. And also, when you look in the regulation, it also says that only the outside is dyed in black and the inside is still natural leather. Because with the black wax, you cannot dye natural leather. It had to be pre-dyed black, and on top of it, you will use this special wax, which you can reproduce. And our unit, we reproduce this black wax, and then you have to apply it, and then you have to polish it, and you use a wooden piece of wood to polish the black wax. and as soon as it's finished and you wear it for one day, it's cracked again. So that was the reason why a lot of cartridge pouch covers come up later in the days of the empire. And once I couldn't understand eyewitnesses there when they said we were happy when we got the white leather because it's much easier to whiten buff belts than to blacken black belts and keep them in a very smooth surface.
Likewise, in our own group, we've followed the recipes of Bardin for whitening the belts and also blackening the giberne, and our conclusions from these experiments are exactly the same. You can't do that on a you cannot inverse the surface because it doesn't adhere and it doesn't stay very well, especially the white. The white recipe, it's not just like a modern shoe polish that you just put it on and it absorbs and it stays. It's actually more like a paste, and you've got to put it on, and it takes a hell of a time to dry. And if you're too quick with it, when you put that belt on, it cracks and it shafts and it looks terrible. And it doesn't grip if it doesn't have the right surface. We tried it on another one with a modern leather, so a very, very shiny finish modern leather, and the thing you can't even get it on. It just comes off straight away as soon as you move the belt. So what Hans Carl's experiences in his reenactment group are exactly the same conclusions we came in our reenactment group as well.
And I was wondering on what would be the rationale to have this rough out giberne with the wax. And the only thing I can think of is that wax must add to the waterproofing. And that makes sense because you really don't want your powder and cartridges to get wet. But other than that, and that's speculation on my part. Any other comments on this particular question from anyone else?
Yeah, when you heat up the wax, it will sink. It will penetrate into the leather.
Yep.
So it's really absolutely waterproof. And also, like when it hardens after that, you have a sort of a very stiff lid, and it will, when you open it, and you release it, it will fall back on top of the cartridge box, and you don't have to do anything. It's really good. And if you use modern shoe polish, you don't know why they did it like this. So you have to go back, construct it as it was constructed then, and then you use the black wax or the wax which they used, and then all would make sense to you.
Bardin, in his later dictionary, actually, when he talks about the giberne, he says that specifically the Imperial Guard and the Garde de Paris, the two Garde de Paris regiments, they waxed the giberne covers in order to dispense themselves from buffing them later on. So they were authorized to use a process that they could wax it. Therefore, they didn't need to reapply polish anymore on it. But it seems that this was only for the Guard and the Garde de Paris units, if you follow Bardin's dictionary.
The Guard actually used varnish.
Yeah,
they changed
that's
from
the word.
wax
That's the English
to
word I
varnish.
couldn't find.
Yes, also the cartridge boxes. And there's an order book about the second regiment of the Imperial Guard standing orders, and you can read about it when they changed over. But it was a Guard thing, I think. The line units didn't do it.
Question number 3, and I think we know the answer to this, but I just want to put this one to bed. And since we're recording this, I want to record this for all posterity. Question number 3, were bread bags such as those carried by British and other Allied coalition infantry ever routinely carried by French infantry? Comments? Mark, I'm looking at you again. Yeah.
No.
And,
There is
and why
no
do you say that?
There is nothing in the regulations of the Napoleonic Army, the Revolutionary Army, or the King's Army that makes reference to anything that looks like the reenacted bread bag for French troops. And I've gone all the way back again to 1755 about this. There is talk in the infantry regulations in 1813 about a little bag called a musette, but it's a small particular bag that cavalrymen used to carry their brushes and their tools when they had to go to the stables to take care of their horses. And last but not least, the pictorial evidence is also incredibly clear about this. No, you don't find it. We have come across one period dated sketching of an 1812 campaign soldier wearing a bread bag, just one. And then afterwards, on closer analysis, this is the Army of Italy. This is the Kingdom of Italy's troops, not French troops again. However, there is evidence that the first corps soldiers in 1812, Davout's first corps, he issued a specific order giving a bag to carry bread to the soldiers. He then, in his instructions, proceeds to explain exactly what it is. It is a huge bag that's supposed to carry, I believe, 2 or 3 loaves, and it is in essence the size almost of a sleeping bag. So it's not the small little bread bag. So from my side, this is a definitive reenactorism, if I can use this technical term.
The bread was in the French army was carried in the backpack. The problem is the backpack only would hold 1 loaf. So you have 1 loaf extra. That was the big problem. But they didn't have a bread bag as like in the Prussian army or in the Austrian army or in the Russian army, I think. And when I started reenactment in 1982, of course, we all had, even when we're doing French soldiers, bread bags, because it was so convenient not to have bread in it, but your camera and your passport and so on and so on. But then, of course, we developed, you start bad, but that's no excuse not to improve. So when we learned that the French army had no bread bags, we had to discard them. And I know it was a big discussion because everybody was so fond of his bread bag. But in the end, we discarded it because it was not worn on a regular basis in the French army. However, in 1805, when the French plundered the Vienna arsenal, 8,000 Austrian bread bags were distributed for the French army. So it could be, on and off there for 1 or 2 or 3 months. Some soldiers did wear a bread bag, but then it wore out. And so in my view, if you do a normal, usual, average French infantry soldier, you should not carry a bread bag. It's a very, very bad and wrong and misleading impression. You have your Saga Distribution d'Ormier, which was used to carry bread, like when you go and you collect your bread for your squad or whatever, you would then maybe carry in that bag 10 pieces of bread, and then you would distribute it to the soldier. The problem was the backpack has only 1 loaf of bread, and we know the dimension of the bread. And the next problem is, where do you carry the other loaf? But that's another discussion. Badar is mentioning it. And when you look sometimes close at pictures, you see that they have a funny round thing hanging on the hips. And that's the loaf of bread pierced by a string and worn across the shoulder and on the hip.
They had an
Of course they
official
had
water
water bottles.
bottle.
Oh, of course
There was
they
an
had.
officially sanctioned water bottles.
Yes,
It is.
they had.
The petit bidon, is that
The
Excellent.
petit
Yes.
bidon. Exactly, the small tin canteen,
Yes,
which
yeah.
was later replaced by the bottle inside a wicker basket. This was officially replaced, and after they went back to the old system as well.
But the illustrations and so forth have got a huge number of different type of water bottles.
Yes.
Yes,
And
yes.
do you know why?
Do
you know why?
There is documentation for that.
But do you know why the illustrations have so different water bottles? Have you ever drank water out of a white metal tin?
It's
According to
horrid.
according to the regulation, constructed water bottle, you taste rust, and as soon as you find a substitute, you will use it.
Well, that's
And-
why
But also you've got a lot of lead in there and the coating and so forth. So it's again sort of going, it's a good way of poisoning yourself.
But we know from the American War of Independence that the Rochambeau's units were completely equipped with the bidon, the petit bidon, because they had they had to be repaired, and then we knew that they for such and such amount of months they had to repair such and such amount of water bottle. But that's a big myth that the French army didn't have a specific
regulation,
water bottle, and they are battlefield finds actually.
Right.
quite a few where you find the petit bidon.
Now, being a reenactor who has been drinking out of a petit bidon for the past 15 or so years, I can confirm the taste of rust does get on your nerve after a while, but somehow again, using the Bardin regulations, I followed his advice, which is to add vinegar, and it does alter the taste to something a little bit more palatable, but it's still, for my modern 21st century palates, difficult sometimes to drink. But to swing back, yes, there was a regulation
Aren't
bottle.
they coated in tin coating, or are you talking about
Alors, my reenacting one is coated in beeswax.
beeswax? Okay.
Beeswax, because we know that lead is a poison, and I do not wish to kill myself, even if it is 100% historic.
Because again, sort of going, the problem is it's sort of going, you suddenly put acetic acid in there with lead, it will dissolve the lead and actually make that more active and more dangerous to the person drinking.
Well, in the case of my water bottle, is the more water you add, the more it attacks the walls coated with the beeswax, and once it gets past the beeswax, it starts to rust, and that's when you get the rusty taste and the bits of rust floating about. But again, that's my reenacting bottle, and it's not 100% the canteen that they had, because I don't want to poison myself with leather. With the lead, sorry. But there is a regulation.
The other thing you could use is citric acid, which would be far more useful.
I'll note that.
Question 4, were the cartridge belts for short-sworded bayonets a different width than the belts for the Gibert? Or words to that effect? Comments?
Yep. I think, because it changed later. I think in Bardin it was identical, but pre-Bardin it was different. Because in the 1786 regulations, you will find about the width of the bayonet and the cartridge pouch belt that it had different widths. I think one was the cartridge pouch belt was wider. It was 3 pouces. It's about 1.8 centimeters or something like this. And the saber belt was only 2.5 French pouces, or 2.5 French inches. And because this developed, because originally the cross belt, the cross saber belt, was a waist belt. And then the French started to carry it across the shoulder already in the 7 Years' War, at least on the march. And then when you look at some eyewitnesses or contemporary drawings, like Geisler in the campaign of 1806, he was a Saxon artist, and you can spot it, that they have different widths.
Answered. Depends the time period we are talking about. In his 1813 Manuel d'Infanterie, Bardin says that the banderole to carry the cartridge box is 1.65 meters in length and 8 centimeters in width. He states that the baudrier, which carries the briquet, is a 1.624 meters in length and 610 millimeters width. However, he also states that the 1801 regulations that give the 1.624 meters length was, except for grenadier soldiers, too long, and that it was changed in response to the Règlement d'Infanterie of 1st October 1786, which gives the length of 4 pieds 10 pouces, which he also stated was already too long. So they try to resolve the problem that it was too long for the soldiers by giving a new width, which, yes, is shorter, but in Bardin's opinion in 1813 is still too long for the soldiers. So in his 1813 books, he gives it as 1.65 meters in length, 8 centimeters in width for the cartridge box belt.
And I actually did a little research. I consulted Lucien Rousselot, who I'm sure you're familiar with. He quotes the same 1801 regulation. And in his book, he says that the baudrier, the sword belt, is 61 millimeters wide, whereas the Gibert belt, banderole, the Gibert belt is 80 millimeters wide, which conforms to what you just said. But he also says that according to Bardin, it was reduced. The Gibert belt was reduced to 70 millimeters wide in 1812.
Just about the length. A lot of people, they don't check the 1787 add-ons to the 1786 regulations. And there it's prescribed how you can shorten the cartridge pouch belt and how you should achieve it. You must read, if you want to carry it shorter, you can do it when you just read the 1787 add-ons to the 1786 regulations. And there you see what method they used so that they could reach easier to the cartridge pouch. Because if it's too low, you have problems to get the cartridges up. But the French were quite famous for low-hanging cartridge pouches because the Germans, when they saw the French soldiers, they said their cartridge pouches were hanging to their knees. Of course, they were over commending it, but the usual German soldiers, they had it higher up than the French.
Next question, 5. Was the parade uniform only worn for parades and ceremonies, or was it occasionally worn in battle?
Okay. I actually came across something quite recently doing other research. It's in the regulations governing garrison duty, and that covers the daily life of a soldier. And there's a little text that talks about the tenue de service, the service dress. And the only thing that's stated on it is the tenue de service. Soldiers will wear the black woolen gaiters for service. They will wear grey gaiters for marches. That's all that this article states. My interpretation from that is the march is also when they leave garrison to go to war. Therefore, they're wearing grey gaiters. Are they carrying black gaiters in their backpacks or in some wagons, as some people say? Are they carrying their grand tenue in a wagon and all that? I have got absolutely no idea, and I can't comment on that.
The regulation that specifies what the soldiers should carry in the sac à dos, in the backpack. And that regulation clearly says, black gaiters and either made of canvas or wool and the culottes. But
Yes.
as Hans Carl provided in his response to me in his email, and I've read in other circumstances, there are, from memoirs, reports of soldiers being issued brand new culottes, and then on the day they marched away from the bivouac, all those culottes were left behind because they didn't want to carry. Another contributor, another reenactor named Phil Tim, who some of you may know, he's in the UK. He does a lot of research. He cited two things from the 1812 campaign. And according to what he cited, when the French army, the Grande Armée, marched across the Niemen River into Russia, it was ordered that all regiments wear the parade uniform. And he cited the source of that, and I think his name is Planet de la Fée. I don't even know if I'm close to that in French. And that same source also says that during the Battle of Borodino, that everyone was given orders to participate in that battle in grand tenue. Now, whether they actually did or they didn't, I don't know. And additionally, some of you may have heard of an artist named Albrecht Adam, who accompanied Napoleon's headquarters into Russia. And I've looked at many of his paintings, and most of his paintings are, kind of not very military. They're not depicting battles, but he does paint a few skirmishes. And presumably, if he was with Napoleon's headquarters, therefore he was an eyewitness in those paintings in which he paints French soldiers in skirmish, it looks like they're wearing grand tenue. So I think I can safely say there is some degree of evidence that at least for the 1812 campaign, grand tenue was worn in battle. But that's as far as I can say, and I'm with Mark. As to other campaigns and periods, I have no idea. Any other comments?
Yeah, I have to strongly disagree. This is rubbish. Because when you throw away your parade dress, whatever order you get, you cannot wear them. And then we have to establish what is parade dress. Parade dress would be white breeches, white gaiters, white waistcoat for line infantry, for light infantry, it would be of course all blue. So there are numerous eyewitness reports where they tell that they throw away their parade dress. And for one regiment, I know specifically, they threw away everything without their greatcoats, their shirts, and their long overalls. Completely. Because they had to march every day this huge amount on sandy roads and in absolutely incredible heat. So for the soldier is, and also I read in one of the memoirs that a soldier threw it away because the veterans were doing it, and then he was reprimanded by his NCO. But he said, "Look, all the other soldiers they also threw away their parade dress." And this famous order at Borodino is very well known. But as I said, a lot of soldiers wouldn't have any longer any parade dress. What they would have maybe done is clean their uniform. What they would have done maybe take off the shako cover. What they would have done maybe put on a plume on the shako. And but in general, especially the French infantry, they wouldn't have had any parade dress along with them any longer. There's one eyewitness account in 1813 where Odenleben, a Saxon officer, he commanded the French battery before they went into action in the Battle of Dresden. They swapped from campaign dress to parade dress. That's the only eyewitness account I found. So it may be possible, but I think the usual soldier would just have his uniform coat, maybe the greatcoat and the overall, and or pants, and not any longer any breeches and white gaiters.
I agree with you. I've read those memoirs that say the soldiers have disposed of anything that they didn't absolutely need because they didn't want to carry it. I was in the infantry for 21 years. I heartily agree with that sentiment. I agree. I think it's highly unlikely that many battles were fought by the French in the full grand tenue. I think it's likely, as you stated, they made an attempt to take off the shako covers, dress up, look neat, but that was probably the extent of that. Are there any other comments? Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to also propose the images drawn on the field by I can't remember his name. I think it's Dufab or something like this. He was a Württembergish officer, and he did a very, very famous set of sketches on the drawing of the Russian campaign in 1813. And all those guys are wearing overalls. All those guys have got visibly, they're not woolen gaiters, I would hazard to say, but they're black and white sketches. But they're not at all in parade uniforms whatsoever. Shako covers, some grey coats, overalls rolled up for most of them, gaiters under the trousers, and they don't look in parade, and that's marching order. So what the Farb, if that is his name, saw on the field in Russia and in 1813, that links actually just on the level of the gaiters that I stated from the regulations, where marching is done with the grey gaiters.
I think most likely you didn't wear parade dress. Most likely. So if you want to be the average French soldier, I would say I would prefer to wear campaign dress. But as you said, there might be the on and off example where also parade dress from some specific units maybe wear one. But usually I wouldn't wear it.
I echo Hans Karl's comments. I think the position that should be proposed is it's the campaign uniform that was worn, and on very specific odd occasions with maybe certain units, also at a certain battle, someone did wear a form of parade uniform. But I think I would agree with Hans Karl on this particular point.
The next question, number 6, were issued breeches broad fall or narrow fall? And if there was a change from one to the other, when did that occur?
Grand pont literally translated big bridge. That means the big wide front, the wide front. Yes. Petit pont, little bridge, is small front, just to answer your question, Jim. The 1812 regulations actually do talk about the pantalon de tricot. So they parade trousers, the full dress, the normal service trousers in a garrison, and they do talk about the pantalon de toile. But as far as the fall is, it's exactly the same. It's a wide fall. They're both the same. There's not a narrow or wide fall. They're both wide falls.
When I check the Manuel de Infanterie, they always speak about Grand Pont-Levis, always.
And
But
that
when you look at prints, then maybe there were also some small Pont-Levis worn. And actually, a lot of captured clothing was worn as well. I mean, half the French army from 1805 to 1807 did wear captured Austrian, Prussian, and Saxon uniform stuff. Number one, we have to get rid of our modern thinking, what's a campaign dress? Now you have a battlefield dress uniform, and you have like your parade dress or special dress for indoors and so on. At this time, you had one uniform code. This had to serve for everything. So it was for campaign, it was for parade, and then of course you were adapting during a parade. So they were when you had your parade dress and there was an order given, like in a camp or in a garrison duty, you would go then with white gaiters, white breeches, and so on. But on campaign, when you look at it, it's completely different. The soldier would go, at least the French soldier would go as comfortable as possible. And usually they did not wear breeches, they did wear the linen overalls, they did wear the gray gaiters. And especially the 1805 army, I mean, Stephen can attest this, was a very, very poorly equipped French army. And it was designated to invade Britain and not to march to Austria. I mean, how people come to the idea that they have a complete parade dress outfit, the 1805 units, that didn't have good muskets. They were worn out infantry muskets. The 1805 army, it's a misconception. It's a very poorly equipped and army. I mean, Stephen, you wrote the book about the 1805 army. I hopefully you can agree with me on that point.
They didn't have the wagons. I mean, it's again sort of like going, it's wonderful that they got to the Danube and crossed the Rhine. But if they hadn't taken Vienna and the magazines and so forth, they would have suffered horrendously. It was the magazines, it was the ability to actually completely resupply, re-equip, re-uniform, and so for the army that made a huge difference. Have a look at what the Austrians had in their stores. If you want to look at greatcoats and so forth, you had a huge number of greatcoats that were from Austrian origins. Voltigeurs were introduced in effect on the march. So the distinctions of the Voltigeurs and so forth was an interesting concept. When did they actually wear them? And when did they actually have time to go and have the various distinctions of the epaulettes and the green plumes, etc.? Maybe by Austerlitz.
We must clear what is parade dress. I hate this. It's a grand tenue, okay? And this was very specific. White gaiters, white breeches, white waistcoat, uniform coat, hat, plume, and so on. And when you on the march, you don't wear white gaiters. Mark already pointed it out. Usually gray gaiters were worn. Or what we say, gray gaiters is wrong as well, because they said gray linen. And gray linen means, and this 18th century speak, undyed natural linen. So it was more brownish, grayish linen, not like gray as we understand of gray today. And then these poor guys, they have to march from Boulogne all the way down under very bad weather conditions to the Danube. I mean, this wear and tear on equipment, why did they in Russia look so badly in 1812? Because they marched thousands and thousands of miles. They had to sleep, they had to bivouac. I mean, everybody who was in the field can imagine how their outlook changed from the start in Bologna to Ulm. So Grand Tenue, white gaiters, white breeches, white waistcoat. I think white breeches and white gaiters most unlikely. So they would adapt and they would not wear Grand Tenue in the campaign.
And the Grand Tenue post 1812 is stated as being a black woolen gaiters and the pantalon de tricot. They did away completely with the breeches by 1812, and they stopped white gaiters for the Grand Tenue. For the Grand Tenue. Since I think everybody is saying, even at Austerlitz, they would be wearing some form of tenue de campagne, campaign uniform.
Yeah, I'm getting that impression. I mean, the question we reenactors have, okay, what should we be wearing? What I'm getting now, if I want to portray myself as a French soldier at the Battle of Austerlitz, I probably won't be in white gaiters. I may not even be in gaiters and breeches. I may have some natural linen breeches and whatever linen pantaloons I could have bought, purchased, or stolen along the way. That seems to be what I think that impression would look like.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Fascinating conversation so far. I'm about to end our recording, but please stay online as we continue to chat. To wrap up this month's Rally Point, thank you, Jim Cormier, Mark Middleton, and Hans Weiss for joining us. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For those of you who have joined us live this evening, thank you for your time with us. And next time, why not join us here at the Rally Point next month, when we'll catch up with Christopher Main, who is going to introduce a series on the cuirassiers, the French heavy cavalry. Simply contact Dominic or I for your Zoom invite, and our details are at the end of the video. Share Rally Point with your friends so we can hear from them as well. Now, any previous Rally Point chats are up on our YouTube channel. So if you've enjoyed this Rally Point, please leave a quick review. So it's good morning from me, and it's good night from him.
Good night.